The following webinar is presented by the American Diplomacy Journal, bringing foreign affairs insight and analysis from practitioners and scholars to online readers for 25 years at americandiplomacy.org. Founded in 1996 by Dr. Henry E. Maddox and Ambassador T. Frank Krigler, the journal is published quarterly and subscriptions are free. Now to our webinar.
Welcome to the 25th anniversary celebration of the American Diplomacy Journal. I'm Barbara Stevenson, Vice Provost for Global Affairs here at UNC Chapel Hill. My team and I, led by Ingrid Smith, are delighted to be providing technical support for tonight's event. Before coming to UNC 2 years ago, I spent nearly 34 years as an American diplomat. So tonight's topic, how does U.S. diplomacy benefit Americans, is near and dear to my heart. I'm so grateful to Ambassador Pearson and other leaders of the American diplomacy publishers for deciding to celebrate the journal's 25th anniversary with this event, one that pulls the curtain back on what diplomats do and increases understanding of why diplomacy matters. UNC students are among those joining us for tonight's event. Some may be interested in pursuing careers in diplomacy and other national security fields. A broader circle may be interested in just learning how diplomacy works. UNC's new diplomacy initiative, my signature project as Vice Provost for Global Affairs, is designed to answer the needs of both groups and beyond. Through the Diplomacy Initiative, we seek to bring experienced diplomats and other foreign policy practitioners to Carolina to build understanding of the vital role diplomacy plays in addressing the grand challenges of our time. Tonight's event, with Ambassador Pearson at the helm, moderating a distinguished panel of former Foreign Service officers, is a sparkling addition to UNC's fledgling Diplomacy Initiative. Let me just close by thanking Ambassador Pearson for the invitation to open tonight's event and by welcoming you all again to UNC, even if only virtually. And now it is my honor to turn the mic over to Ambassador Robert Pearson, former U.S. Ambassador to Turkey, former Director General of the U.S. Foreign Service, and now President of American Diplomacy Publishers.
Barbara, thank you very much for that warm introduction, and our thanks to UNC and to you for this opportunity to celebrate our 25th anniversary. I think we were the first digital journal on foreign affairs from the American perspective in the world, and we're delighted to have been in continuous publication since 1996. So we're very happy as well to have a very large audience of people with us tonight, and we're looking forward to the program. It's my opportunity at this point to introduce a video from Senator Chris Van Hollen. Chris Van Hollen is the son of Foreign Service officers. He is dedicated to the role of diplomacy and to the role of the Foreign Service in American diplomacy. He is also a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the Budget Committee, the Banking Committee, and the Housing and Urban Affairs Committee. But his heart is in the Foreign Service, his heart is in diplomacy. And so we're honored to have his video with us tonight. And now I will turn over the program to the showing of his video.
Thank you, Ambassador Pearson, for that introduction. And let me salute you, the entire American Diplomacy Journal family, and the UNC Chapel Hill community for organizing and hosting today's event in celebration of the 25th anniversary of the American Diplomacy Journal. There is no question that this program's theme, What Diplomacy Does for Americans, is on the front of everyone's minds, especially given the current challenges in Afghanistan and the fast-paced events around the world. In recent weeks in Afghanistan, our diplomats have been on the front lines, working overtime to orchestrate the safe evacuation of Americans and many of our closest Afghan partners. Even though the last American soldier has left Afghanistan, America's diplomats are still working around the clock in capitals around the world to bring people to safety. I believe we have an obligation to ensure the safety and help those Afghans who for years have worked closely in support of our common mission. Our nation's diplomats display extraordinary courage each and every day, often putting themselves in harm's way for the rest of us. And for me, this issue isn't just political, it's personal. I was born into a foreign service family. I was born in Karachi, Pakistan, and lived in India, Sri Lanka, and Turkey. From a young age, I witnessed firsthand the immense impact our diplomats have in furthering American security, American interest, and important values and principles around the world. Work that has direct consequences on our ability to live in peace and prosperity here at home. Throughout my career, I've gotten to work side by side with the extraordinary men and women of our Foreign Service and others who are part of the State Department family. First as a young staff member on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, then as a member of the House of Representatives, and now as a United States Senator. And I'm proud to currently serve on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where I chair the Senate Subcommittee on Africa and Global Health Policy. I believe, without reservation, that the United States and the world benefit from strong American engagement and leadership. Leadership grounded in our nation's values, including the promotion of democracy, universal human rights, the rule of law, a free press, and a rules-based free market system. The success of our diplomatic efforts around the globe have also taken on an added measure of urgency as we face new challenges on the world stage that increasingly depend on effective international partnerships and strong relationships. Those include tackling the spread of pandemic diseases like the current coronavirus and confronting the accelerating climate crisis head-on. We must also work with allies to prevent the rise of authoritarianism around the globe and to support those who support freedom, democratic governance, and human rights, and challenge those who don't. In our interconnected and interdependent world, diplomacy is one of the sharpest foreign affairs tools we have at our disposal, and we must use that tool wisely. But sharpening those tools requires that we rededicate ourselves to the mission of defending and supporting our foreign service officers and all others on the front lines of diplomacy. Across the globe, these Americans, like our military, work tirelessly to protect and promote America's interests, often at great personal risk and sacrifice. That is true of their work in normal times, and it's been especially true during this pandemic. Throughout COVID-19, these public servants have been working overtime to help Americans abroad return home or weather the storm. It is vital that we answer that service not only with our words, but with our deeds. I'm proud to have worked across the aisle with my Republican colleague, Dan Sullivan, Senator from Alaska, to co-found the Foreign Service Caucus, a bipartisan forum to recognize and discuss the challenges facing our career foreign service officers and State Department civil servants, and to develop legislation to better support their needs. The caucus fosters direct engagement with senior State Department leadership and highlights the critical work of our State Department personnel. And I was very pleased that earlier this year, the Senate adopted our resolution commemorating Foreign Service Day. I was also proud to reintroduce the Foreign Service Families Act with Senator Sullivan. It would provide more overseas employment opportunities and important benefits to Foreign Service and State Department family members, and ensure that we can continue to attract and retain the best and the brightest to serve our nation overseas. We are pushing for passage of that bill in the coming months. Each of us here has a role to play in protecting, honoring, and defending the brave Americans who are at the heart of our nation's diplomatic efforts. The American Diplomacy Journal has been engaged in that work for 25 years, and I'm proud to call you a full partner in this shared endeavor. It's in that spirit that I'd like to end where I began, by thanking everyone who has helped organize today's webinar, and by congratulating the American Diplomacy Journal on this historic anniversary. Congratulations on 25 years. Here's to 25 more.
So now we're going to listen to a number of videos presented by diplomats who are currently serving abroad around the world for the United States. We are going to have to put these videos into 3 different groups, and after each group there will be a question and answer period. So at the end of each group's presentation, we're going to have a 10-minute Q&A session with 4 distinguished ambassadors who are no longer in current service, and their bios are on the website. I will say the bios of the presenters who are currently serving are also on our website. But let me just briefly touch on the bios of our distinguished panelists. Ambassador Piper Campbell was ambassador to Mongolia, has extensive service in national security issues and in international organizations and Asian service, and has taught national security strategy at the National War College. Ambassador Lino Gutierrez served as ambassador to Argentina and to Nicaragua, and also has extensive service elsewhere in Latin America, and is currently the executive director of the Una Chapman Cox Foundation, a very strong supporter of the American diplomatic effort. Ambassador Charles Ray served 30 years in the Foreign Service from 1982 to 2012, after a 20-year career in the U.S. Army. He was the first American Consul General in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, and subsequently was ambassador to Cambodia and to Zimbabwe. Professor Mary Thompson Jones is a retired FSO and author of the well-known book in the Foreign Service entitled To the Secretary: Leaked Embassy Cables and America's Foreign Policy Disconnect. Her 23-year career as a Foreign Service officer included leadership roles in Europe, in Latin America, and in Washington. So we welcome them to our community tonight, and now we are ready to begin the video presentations.
There's a saying in Montenegro, where I worked recently as the Deputy Chief of Mission of the U.S. Embassy. U dobru je lako doba biti, na muci se poznaju junaci, which means that it is easy to do good in good times, but in times of adversity, we see true heroes. I think the last year and a half of extraordinary adversities due to the global pandemic have really highlighted the many heroes in the U.S. Foreign Service and the value of diplomacy for the American people. For example, in Montenegro, I worked with tremendous pride, side by side with dedicated Foreign Service officers who calmed panicked Americans not able to get home due to the closing of airspaces throughout Europe. We arranged special repatriation flights, negotiated safe passage for these Americans to get to the airport from throughout the lockdown country. All the while, we quietly worried about our own loved ones at home who might be vulnerable to the virus. To me, this is really American diplomacy in action. It is not glamorous. Arranging planes, buses, and police escorts is a far cry from the stereotypical image of pinstripe suits sipping champagne at cocktail parties. Indeed, more often than not, diplomacy to me is about late nights and early mornings, working hard, cultivating relationships with the people and the government of our host nations, devising strategies for win-win solutions to some of the vexing challenges that countries share in the world. Solutions that benefit U.S. national interests and the interests of American citizens. During my 22 years in the Foreign Service, I have visited American citizens in foreign prisons to make sure that they are treated fairly and humanely. I have negotiated market access and the lowering of trade barriers so that American companies can fairly compete and American workers can reap the benefits of selling their products and services in foreign markets like Russia and Taiwan. And on countless occasions, I have represented the American people in providing generous donations to communities in need, whether that's vulnerable Roma families displaced by the war in the Balkans in the 1990s, or sick children in Montenegrin hospitals. Generosity is part of who we are as Americans. Everywhere I have served, I've promoted this and other American values to foreign audiences, all the while being proud to represent the diverse and colorful mosaic of American society. That, to me, is the best part of being a U.S. Foreign Service officer.
American diplomats proudly serve their country, the United States of America. It is our responsibility to protect our borders, to promote economic prosperity, and share American values abroad. In the practice of diplomacy, I often think about the type of future I want my children to have and the type of world I want them to live in. Well, in our work, we're doing all the right things to lay the foundation so they too have stability and security. What we do is to promote commercial interest, promoting American businesses, large and small, so that blue-collar workers, farmers, and women, people from urban and rural communities, have an opportunity to invest and grow their businesses. I also love working with youth abroad, because when we work with youth in Africa, Latin America, Asia, and Europe, we are giving them the tools, professional development tools, so that they can improve their country, that they can develop the right programs so that young people can thrive. And when other countries thrive, the United States prospers. I love the work we do, particularly in promoting American universities. By promoting American universities and encouraging international students to choose the United States as a destination of choice, we have historically, through diplomacy, helped promote and contribute nearly $40 billion to the American economy, creating 500,000 jobs. And we should continue to do so. We should continue to promote American businesses so that they too remain competitive and also are able to show our counterparts abroad best practices that improve and elevate the standard of human rights when it comes to labor issues. Now, one of my favorite quotes is by former President John Quincy Adams, who once said, "If your actions inspire others to dream more, to learn more, to do more, and become more, you are a leader." And that's what we are. The work we do in diplomacy is the work that promotes leadership for America and the global community, and it's to helping to create a better future for all American citizens by ensuring that our borders are safe, that people have jobs, and our kids have a future.
I've worked for the department for 12 years, mostly in the Soviet Union, with tours in Moldova, Uzbekistan, Washington, Ukraine, and Afghanistan, in bilateral, not multilateral settings, so I'll talk about these. Over my career, I've worked to advance U.S. priorities in human rights, anti-corruption, judicial reform, and other fields to help societies overcome the consequences of their past, often their Soviet past. Some of these efforts have been more successful, while others have been undermined by our fundamental lack of understanding of the dynamics within the societies we attempt to change. And here, I think, is one of the key values we as diplomats can bring. Political life is governed by the stories people tell themselves and others. We function on the basis of which stories we accept. Too often, we accept stories reflexively and formulate policies on this basis, such as when we choose to accept polished, Western-educated interlocutors as trustworthy because they resemble us. And yet, effective policy is impossible without understanding the fundamental drivers and interests of our allies and challengers, and how these relate to the declarative narratives told for the benefit of domestic and foreign audiences. As diplomats living among societies not our own, we must ensure that the stories we tell our policymakers about the countries of our assignment are founded in reality. We must understand when things are said to influence and not to inform, evaluating multiple sources against each other to offer a cogent analytical framework for decision-making. As part of a complex policy-making apparatus, even when we are right in our analysis, at times we struggle to be heard. Yet when we are successful, and when our policymakers are willing to hear new information, even if it challenges their own assumptions, we can make a difference, as George Kennan did with his long telegram, which simplified the complexity of the Soviet Union for the non-expert and offered a cogent, workable policy prescription. Understanding the prevailing narratives in our countries of assignment and the assumptions and realities behind them also allows us to explain our own ends to foreign interlocutors in ways that resonate with them, to demonstrate empathy for the societies in which we work by finding common ground where possible and understanding and addressing our differences. Finally, it is our duty to remember that our ability to influence events through diplomatic means often depends on the power of our example, on demonstrating, not just incessantly repeating a commitment to our values, abroad and at home. Because just as we see the disconnect between these words and actions in other countries, so do others see it in us. And this costs us trust and goodwill with challengers and allies alike. For that reason, we also do a profound service to the people of the United States when we demonstrate the breadth and scope of our diversity as a nation and a commitment to a multiplicity of voices by a foreign service that mirrors that diversity and can help erase boundaries between us and some mythical other.
Educational and cultural programs writ large, I would say, bring people of all ages and stages to the United States for their life-changing experiences, as it takes Americans to foreign countries for similarly life-changing experiences. The alumni in all the countries where I have served, we call them alumni of our U.S.-sponsored exchange programs, often return to their home countries with such a sense of American culture and values. Their experience tend to leave such a lasting impression that many people I've met will give me chapter and verse, hour by hour, their recollections of their times in the United States, if they went 20 years ago, if they went 15 years ago. I also feel when we can't sponsor an exchange program for every citizen of the world to come to the United States, the other best tool that we have to use is the English language to build that bridge with the United States. We support English language learning all over the world. In Kazakhstan, for example, we have excellent programs for middle school and high school students. We support teacher trainings at universities, and of course those teachers, when they strengthen their English, there's a multiplier effect. Then they're more able and more capable to get the enthusiasm and energy and knowledge that they have passed on to new generations. So it's, and we have found over time, it's really is true that with improved English skills, people around the world are more likely to come to visit the United States for study, for business, or for tourism. They're more likely to buy American products, to do business with American companies, certainly consume U.S. entertainment. Hollywood remains a big draw for language learning as well.
What's my job? Overseas, I'm proud to say that I'm a U.S. diplomat. If my young kids are asking, my job is to help countries solve problems by using their words. But I think the best answer expresses less who I think I am or what I think I do, but more on whose behalf I'm engaged. And it's this: I represent the American people overseas. I represent you. We found out through the pandemic how much we can do remotely. We also found out where distant digital connections cannot meet our human needs. It's wonderful to video chat with a loved one who's thousands of miles away, but if you get sick, you may need a close neighbor to bring you soup. Diplomacy can be like this too. Senior US officials can jump on the phone and sometimes on a plane, but my job is being there in the neighborhood every day. When I'm overseas working on behalf of the American people, my job is understanding the country I'm in and advocating for America. Only with this understanding can we see our shared interests and begin to whittle away at our disagreements. You can't always do this from afar. You have to speak the language, break bread with the people. Sometimes what we do overseas on behalf of the American people has an obvious, immediate impact. Those times when I've helped an American couple go home with their newly adopted child, given an American business operating overseas critical market information, or even convinced a government of a US position, are immensely rewarding. It's not always that fast or that easy. In my career thus far, I've been lucky to work in some places most Americans don't think about every day. Yet what happens there absolutely impacts our national interest and the well-being of the American people. Terrorists, climate change, wars don't respect borders. Neither do viruses. We don't know where the next pandemic is going to emerge, where the next young person with a great idea is growing up, which government will help us end a destabilizing conflict, take in refugees, be our ally in a time of need. Our job is to see the opportunities, warn of the dangers, and most importantly, tend to the relationships. In your hour of need, you don't want to cold call a stranger. You want to talk to a friend, or at least understand your negotiating partner's position. Our chances of calling a friend go up with every relationship we forge overseas on your behalf. Like so much relational work, what I do can sometimes feel invisible. Progress can be slow, setbacks inevitable. Yet, as anybody who works with people I think understands, you get back what you put in. That's what I try to remember every day when I work on your behalf overseas.
And now I'd like to turn to our panelists. And Ambassador Campbell, let me start with you, if I may, and then others, please join in on the same question. But in American diplomacy, values count a lot. Democracy, human rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And this has been our face to the world. So what sort of role should these values play in American diplomacy? And how should we address the future in a more complicated, more fractious world with these values as one of our hallmarks?
Indeed. Values, I think both that values are such an important aspect of how we communicate out to the world and make those friends or even connect with people who may not choose to be our friends, as one of the speakers before me alluded to. And I think that another aspect of our values is that it's one of the things that inspires people to choose careers in the Foreign Service. And so the comment that as Foreign Service officers, we're representing the United States in living on a daily basis the values that we believe that the United States holds and stands for. I think that's a really important aspect and certainly something that inspired me during my Foreign Service career. When I was the Consul General in Southern Iraq, that was one of the most, for me, was the time where this question of how our values fit with a challenging reality really came into sharp vision. And the situation was one where there were so many people, so many Iraqis and others who were convinced that the United States was in Iraq for purely commercial reasons. And yet through our actions, we've consistently tried to communicate a broader commitment to Iraq as a country and to the Iraqi people. In terms.
We'll hear from some of our other colleagues too on this issue of values and the role of values in American diplomacy now and going forward. Ambassador Ray?
I think it's what I found important in my assignments overseas is not just that we enunciate our values, but that all of our actions, our nonverbal communication, also back it up. And as an example, I'll give a story. Ambassador to Zimbabwe, of course, one of the issues that we constantly pounded the government on was proper treatment of human rights, proper treatment of individuals, that the welfare of individuals was paramount, and that was the government's responsibility. And of course, you had a government that was more concerned with staying in power than listening, and we got a lot of pushback until we had an incident that was so embarrassing to the government because it was an example of what we meant. We had an American who was arrested, and we had a sort of a commercial issue, an issue with an organization, and it happened in the same province. And our embassy was faced with a bit of a dilemma. If we helped the American who was in trouble with the police, we wouldn't be able to help the organization. But if we helped the organization, we could forget any cooperation from the police in helping the individual. And of course, we had pressure from two sides in Washington. The people who had commercial interest wanted the organization help. Consular affairs wanted us to do our job. And I had to make a decision. And my decision was actually very simple. We had been talking about the rights of individuals and protecting those rights. And so I basically went to bat for the individual, and we let the organizations fend for themselves until we had that settled. And it's so through the government off stride, because they had been talking about American hypocrisy and greed. And when we basically left these organizations hanging so we could help this individual get out of trouble, it was so embarrassing that the foreign minister himself had to basically call me in and apologize for some of their propaganda. And this is just a small point, and most Americans never even know that diplomats are doing these kinds of things, but these are the kinds of things that you are put in a position as a diplomat to do that really make a difference.
Let me take that last comment and ask Professor.
And I would say that communicates what we are. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I was going to take your last comment and ask Professor Thompson Jones to take a look at this idea that in promoting our values, sometimes people think that we're trying to act as if we're superior, that we do have the best way for people to act around the world, and that there's a kind of haughtiness and pride, too much pride sometimes in the way we talk about our values. Could you address that from your experience and your thoughts?
Sure. I think that in my experience, some of the best spokespeople for American values come from the artistic and creative community. I remember when I was in the Czech Republic, Václav Havel had just become president of the country. He was also president of something called the PEN Society, an International Association of Writers. He asked us if we would facilitate bringing Arthur Miller, a renowned American playwright who wrote many things, but the most impressive from the Czech point of view, perhaps, was The Crucible. And we busted the budget for the entire year to pay his fee, and we brought him. We also brought an up-and-coming, an African-American poet named Yusef Komunyaku. Between the two of them, they accomplished more in terms of articulating American values. Being humble, the theme of The Crucible is not one that is a swaggering America. It's quite stark in terms of the inner conflicts of society. This really spoke to Czechs. And our ability as diplomats to be conveners, to bring the best of American intelligentsia, best of American ideas to foreign audiences can really make a big difference, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. I want to ask Ambassador Gutierrez a different question, but one that's related to American culture. And that is that we are now putting a great deal of emphasis on having the American diplomatic service really represent the American people on diversity in every category. How does that commitment for ourselves translate overseas, do you think, in terms of the way people view America? Is this, are we once again trying to foist ideas on cultures that don't appreciate the values that we now embrace for diversity? Or are we showing them an example through our own work with the Foreign Service on what kind of society is most peaceful and most creative?
I think we have to be who we are. And what attracted me to the Foreign Service in the first instance, having been born in another country, was the fact of what the United States stood for, be it values like democracy and human rights, but also the value of diversity and the value of, social mobility and the fact that we don't have royal families or kings or queens. We are a democratic country, and we have to represent who we are. And we are a nation of immigrants. We're a nation of many ethnic groups. And I think when you have a diverse foreign service and people can see diplomats from different communities, different minorities in the US, and of course, with the election of President Barack Obama, the first African-American president, that sent a resounding message to the rest of the world that anybody in our country can reach the top by working hard and in a society that values diversity and equality. We are not perfect. We've made many mistakes in the past, but we're working on all these problems. And I think the presence of diverse foreign service officers in a country of immigrants is very important.
Thank you. I think now that we'll need to return to our second series of presentations, and then we'll follow that with a second series of questions. And again, just to remind that if you want to look at the bios, they're available on our website of all of the participants tonight. So shall we go now to the second set of videos, please?
Hi, my name is Lucian Barnes, and I'm a U.S. Foreign Service officer. I've had the pleasure of serving in the Foreign Service for the last 13 years, and they've been 13 awesome years. I've served both domestically and overseas in Washington. Most recently, I served overseas at a U.S. mission as a deputy political chief. In my personal opinion, Foreign Service officers, including political officers, play a key role in supporting Americans and their interests. They do so by developing close relationships with foreign counterparts, as well as developing a deep understanding of local cultures and local political landscapes. In turn, they share this information with policymakers in Washington that develop policies that support the U.S. economy, military, and foreign policy overall.
Hello, my name is Chuka Asike, and I'm a U.S. Foreign Service officer with the State Department. Today, I want to talk to you about diplomacy and what it means to me, but more specifically, how diplomacy impacts the lives of American people, and frankly, how it improves the lives of American people. You know, diplomacy for me is more of an art than a science. When I think about diplomacy, and I define it, it's the art of managing the relationships with foreign governments, foreign peoples, foreign businesses, all over the world. And it's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about because while we work on these complex issues, at the back of our minds, we're always thinking about how can this advance American interests? And in my career, I focused on economic diplomacy. So at the heart of that idea is, how can this help create jobs and improve the prosperity for America in general, as well as our partners? I've had the opportunity to work all over the world, from the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. And part of my work on economic issues has been helping to negotiate complex trade negotiations, and also trying to manage commercial disputes on behalf of American companies, as well as being an advocate for their interests. And for me, this is a very rewarding effort because I know that every little thing that we do to help an American company working overseas or operating in a foreign market, I know that it's going to help improve the prosperity for America, as well as create jobs. And that's something that we're all laser focused on. More recently, while I worked on an Africa portfolio, we set up commercial deal teams at our embassies. And these deal teams were essentially geared at improving the way that American diplomats interact with American companies while overseas, to make sure that we really understand their needs and that we can address some of the issues that they face, and more specifically, the challenges that they confront in markets. We press for more level playing fields and transparency so that our American companies could really have a shot at winning contracts and succeeding. And then ultimately, We want to also promote American solutions to, an array of complex problems all over the world. Because I know that American companies, whether it's in the energy industry or in finance or in the social or educational sphere, we really have top-notch solutions that help improve people's lives.
My name is Branka Bell, and I'm a Foreign Service Officer with the Department of State. I am grateful for the opportunity to share my experiences on such a timely topic. The role of the State Department, my role, and the role of my fellow economic officers in Washington and in the field is to ensure that American prosperity underpins our diplomatic efforts, and that following the pandemic, we work to build a more stable and a more inclusive global economy. I worked most recently in the Office of the Chief Economist to help advance these efforts. During a period of unprecedented global economic instability and uncertainty, we leveraged our access to some of the most renowned economists and policy experts to gain insights on the macroeconomic and financial issues that impact U.S. economic policy. These conversations helped us to better understand the key drivers of fiscal, monetary, and public health policy in the context of how multi-speed global economic recovery from COVID-19 could threaten the flow of capital and trade. Beyond this most recent assignment, I have been fortunate to serve the American people over the course of my career to strengthen economic ties, to promote democracy, and to help American citizens. This has included assignments in Moscow, Warsaw, and Belgrade, and in Washington in the Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs. As a daughter of Romanian immigrants who fled persecution during the height of the Cold War, I am especially grateful for the opportunity to serve my country. I look forward to continuing to advance our democratic values and to safeguarding our economic interests in an increasingly complex world.
Hello, my name is Navarro Moore. I am a diplomat with the U.S. State Department, and I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about how my work benefits the American people. I've served all around the world, and I've been able to hone and use those experiences to the benefit of the American people. I've served in El Salvador, Australia, Ghana, and in several positions here in Washington. I just recently completed an assignment in the State Department's Operations Center, the department's 24/7 Crisis and Communications Hub. That office is composed of two sub-offices. One is the Watch, and the other is Crisis Management and Strategy. I served on the Watch side of the house. I served there as a senior Watch officer for a year, and then I served in our front office management team as the coordinator of the Watch. We coordinate crises around the world. We coordinate response, the State Department's response to foreign policy crises around the world. So when something is happening somewhere, we're oftentimes the first office to know about it. And we get that information to our policymakers here, principally the Secretary of State. We get that information to the Secretary of State and his team as quickly as we can, oftentimes with analysis and additional insight from our interagency partners and also from our embassies abroad. We also coordinate communications for the Secretary of State and his team, ensuring that they have the ability to be in contact with their foreign counterparts or their counterparts here in Washington whenever they like. I think those are our kind of two principal things that we do for the Secretary and his team, but we also, we do a lot of other things as well that directly benefit just everyday Americans. I'll point out two things very quickly here that we do. One is we help Americans in emergency situations. So if you're overseas and you're traveling and you have a health emergency, or you're destitute, or you're stranded somewhere, or you need to get in contact with a loved one back home, whatever the situation is, if you can call the State Department's Operations Center at 202-647-1512 anytime, and we will connect you to our local embassy there in the country that you're at, or officials in Washington who can help you. Also, during crisis situations, oftentimes the Operations Center will stand up an interagency task force to deal with whatever the situation is. During COVID-19, we repatriated thousands of Americans who were traveling overseas and who wanted to come home at the beginning of the pandemic. We made sure that they got home safely. So those are just a couple of the ways that we help everyday Americans and also our State Department team here.
As an American diplomat for the past 25 years, I've had the honor of serving the American people in a number of countries in Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East, as well as in Washington. By promoting democracy, security, and prosperity abroad, and creating partnerships and policy initiatives through our shared values, I am proud to serve our country. That service, particularly to American citizens abroad, could not have been more stark than in March of 2020 in the early stages of the COVID pandemic. As the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs, we encountered thousands of Americans who had traveled to the region for tourism, study, business, missionary work, suddenly all stuck and unable to get out. In the confusion of COVID, governments shut down airports, locked down businesses, and prohibited internal travel. I traveled with a consular team to Lima, Peru, where we had the largest number of trapped Americans at the time, working alongside our embassy colleagues, our military, the Peruvian government, and our Washington staff to reach as many Americans as quickly as possible and help them get safe passage to the capital. Our team recreated a makeshift airport customs and security screening process at a US-built hangar. We bussed and flew in Americans from remote provinces, expedited passports for newborns who hadn't gotten their documents yet, and got them safely on planes home. We negotiated permits with local officials and worked with charter plane companies. We connected Americans to family members at home and responded to inquiries from members of Congress and the press. Seeing those exhausted but relieved Americans getting on planes and repatriated home was the biggest reward for our teams, who have been working around the clock for weeks. It was a reminder to me personally of why I became a diplomat in the first place. That is, to serve the American people.
I'd like to talk specifically about how public diplomacy benefits the American people. Public diplomacy is about engaging with, unsurprisingly, the public, rather than the traditional government-to-government interaction. Public diplomacy in particular matters to the American people because it brings us ideas, talent, economic benefits, and goodwill. Exchanges alone, which represent just a fraction of the work done by public diplomacy practitioners at embassies and consulates around the world, bring academic and economic benefits to the United States. The exchange of talent and ideas going in both directions is how great ideas are born. Our exchanges also bring us economic benefits in many ways. I know of a number of exchange participants who have returned to their home countries and then established business connections with the people they met in the United States. When those U.S. companies open an office in that country to sell their product or make parts for it, they hire local staff who speak English and understand American business culture because of our programming overseas. Public diplomacy is also about how we tell our story of who we are. With social media feeds and Hollywood movies reaching audiences in every country around the world, nearly everyone has some idea of what America is as a nation and who Americans are as a people. Their ideas, however, are often incomplete, perhaps based solely on our pop culture, or worse, on misinformation spread by others. Through exchange programs, social media engagement, outreach to universities, tech conferences, and more, public diplomacy practitioners like myself work overseas to share America's full story. That means being honest about who we are, including presenting our flaws and weaknesses. We explain why the United States does what it does as a world leader to help people around the world understand our values and our mistakes. In my tours overseas, I've given presentations on American history to university students, led speaking clubs for English teachers, and organized hip-hop concerts and breakdancing performances. I've also worked with the Education Ministry in Kazakhstan to help them improve English learning in their schools, and given interviews explaining the visa process in Pakistan. All of these activities helped people in other countries understand who we are in America and find ways that we can work together instead of working against each other. I know I have done my job well when someone says that our interaction changed the way they see America for the better. My work may not appear on the front page of the newspaper or the top of your Twitter feed, but it makes the United States a better place. We keep America safe through high-level policies and international agreements, for sure. We also keep America safe by sharing our story.
Thank you. Now we'll have a question and answer period based on the presentations we've just heard. I think that to answer one question quickly, one person asked the difference between a Foreign Service officer and a political officer. So Foreign Service officer is anyone who passes the exam given by the State Department and may serve in one of a number of skills: economics, a consular, a cultural, management, and political. So our officers cover a wide spectrum, in fact, the entire spectrum of American interest overseas. So that person is a Foreign Service officer, and that Foreign Service officer has a particular skill that they can employ, but they also can do other things. So with that, what I would like to do is perhaps ask Ambassador Ray, tell us what the country team is in an embassy, and how does the country team work with not only State Department officers, but with officers from other agencies and interests of the American government to form American policy and advice going back to Washington?
Well, a country team are the representatives, not only of the other the State Department people within the embassy, but representatives of all of the other agencies that are present in the country. And depending on the size of the embassy and the particular interests between the U.S. and the host country, that can be quite a diverse collection of individuals on the country team. These are people who, on the one hand, they're representing the interests of their agency in Washington, but they're doing it in the context of under the leadership of the ambassador, who is the senior government official in country, as a, to use the term of art from when I retired in 2012, a whole of government approach, or an American government approach to that country. And just to give an example of what might be on a country team, of course, you have your economic, political, consular, and security people from the State Department, Foreign Service, but you have the military, your defense attaché, the aid, U.S. Agency for International Development. In Cambodia, I had 2 representatives from the Forest Service who were working with the Cambodians on deforestation. You have the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI. I mean, it's any U.S. agency that has an interest or program in that country will have a representative, can have a representative in the embassy, and they will be part of the country team. And so what the name implies, it is a team working together to advance U.S. interest writ large, but working on from the prospects of their particular agency.
Thank you. Let me ask Ambassador Gutierrez, from our audience comes the question of what are the practical challenges for American diplomats today? What do you think are the priorities at the top of the list? It's quite a long list, but what are the practical realities for the conduct of American diplomacy in the world today?
Well, I think we have to advance American interests, and American interests center around our security. They center around well-being for our citizens, being able to have free access to goods and resources. And they vary from country to country. In some countries, human rights may be the #1 priority. In another one, security might be the #1 priority. And it's up to us as policymakers to weigh the importance of all our interests and how best to achieve them. And in some countries, it might require a bully pulpit, making a speech. When I was in Haiti, for example, as a political officer, we visited dissidents to ensure that the government knew that we cared about their safety, and a public approach was more effective. In other countries, a more subtle approach might be required. So we have to weigh the history of the country, what is important to the American people in order to decide how best to achieve our results.
Thank you. Ambassador Campbell, let me ask you a question since we had a nice presentation on public diplomacy. So now we have social media in the middle of our lives in almost every aspect. So in terms of diplomacy, what role is what is the impact of social media, in your opinion, in the role of American diplomacy? And what challenges and what opportunities do you think might exist in the use of public diplomacy to deal with issues that affect the American people?
So I think social media is very much the double-edged sword. In a world where all of the old challenges of diplomacy have been joined by new challenges, whether that's climate, whether that's other areas of, say, for example, migration, and many of these being issues that are of particular interest to younger populations in the countries. And we're seeing this great engagement of people, including because of social media and because of the ways that through social media, they're able to find out about things outside of their city or outside of their country and to make connections with people in other countries. So those are some of the positive aspects of social media: the awareness, the information flow, the sense of connection across country borders. But the challenges of social media, and certainly the challenges for diplomats, is the fact that so much information flows, and in many cases, the information is biased, the information is propaganda, the information is designed to influence as opposed to inform. And in that space, it just adds additional tasks to an embassy or to a diplomat. We have to, we're very well positioned, or we should be well positioned, to differentiate between the false information, the propaganda, the actual. We're there on the ground, and so we're in a position to go and follow up, to clarify, to provide perspective, both for our own edification and also to inform back to Washington. It's an area where drawing on all the different types of people in the country team that Ambassador Ray spoke about can give you different perspectives on the issue, as well as different thoughts about how to handle it. Just a real quick story: when I was stationed in Mongolia, we knew that we needed to change. It was time to change, really mature, graduate the relationship between the United States and Mongolia. And it was wonderful to see how all the people on the country team, whether it was military, Peace Corps, or economic officer, understood that the relationship was changing. Mongolia wasn't a new democracy anymore. It was a 30-year-old democracy. The US wasn't there in a development capacity. We wanted to be there as a partner, as an equal. And we were able to use social media very effectively as part of an effort to communicate outwards and to communicate to different audiences in Mongolia that we were moving into a more mature relationship. So there is a positive side to it.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will answer one question and ask another. One person has asked for an example in the success of public diplomacy. And in my career, it was the collapse of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall and the recreation of a Europe whole and free. That for years, people listened to the information they heard from the West, and when the opportunity came, they acted upon it. So now a question that we all knew would be coming tonight, and that is Afghanistan. What would be the approach of American diplomacy now to Afghanistan in trying to balance the possibility of working some way with the Taliban and the need to get as many of the people who helped us out as possible and to protect, of course, any American citizens who are left there and want to remain there. So I throw the question open to any of you. I know we're going to be time limited. There's no good answer to this in 5 minutes, but would you share your views? I think our audience would appreciate it. Okay, Professor Thompson-Jones, please go ahead.
Well, at the Naval War College, there's a lot of talk about the disheartening aspect of this, and certainly there are tragic elements to it. But there was a lot of good work done for a number of years. And I think that once a decent interval has passed, we should try to consolidate and build on what is left behind. There's more to Afghanistan than the Taliban. It's early days. Let's see what solidifies down the road. But I can't believe that the number of citizens that we reached through public diplomacy, through other projects, through all the PRTs and the work that they did in all of the provinces of Afghanistan is totally for naught. I have to think that there are some seeds that were sown, and while they may be dormant for a season or two, ultimately they will have a chance to come to fruition.
Thank you. Anyone else? Ambassador Ray and then Ambassador Campbell.
Well, I would agree with that, but I would also say that in the interim, while we're waiting for some of those seeds that we planted in Afghanistan to germinate, we need to look at the other external actors who do currently have contact with the people in charge in Afghanistan. And I wonder sometimes as I watch the news just who that might be. But for example, the Chinese are making inroads and having a relationship. And while China is our global competitor, we have to recognize that there are areas where it is in our mutual best interest to work together. And to me, Afghanistan is a perfect place where we need to look at the benefits to be gained of working with China. I say the same thing about Africa. There should be competition, yes, but it should not rise to the level of conflict. And I think we should start working with these other people to try and start building those bridges so that when the time comes, we have something we can walk on.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Campbell.
As somebody who worked in and on Afghanistan for a couple of years, I have to say the situation we're seeing now is, on the one hand, something that we always knew could happen. We knew that Afghanistan was fragile, but we knew the work we were doing was difficult and not guaranteed. And yet I think we need to be honest and just say that it is incredibly demoralizing, incredibly disappointing, incredibly sad. And to give it the human face of so many Americans, diplomats as well as military, who worked and sacrificed so much in Afghanistan. And to recognize at the same time the importance of Afghan colleagues, Afghan partners, Afghan officials with whom we worked, and to give some credit to the American officials who are working still right now to support those Afghans who in many cases are having to leave the country. So it's not a pretty picture, and I can't paint it as a pretty picture, but I can say that the effort it was very intentional and the effort continues.
Continues. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? If not, I'm going to Ambassador Gutierrez.
Well, just to say that I think our number one priority is to get American citizens and all the Afghans who worked with us out of the country, all of the ones who want to leave. And that requires engaging with the Taliban and trying to get this done. And I think we should do that and try to do that as soon as possible. For the medium and long term, certainly dialogue should be started with the Taliban, but I would hold no great illusions that they're going to change dramatically very quickly. I guess we can count on their desire to be a respectable nation, perhaps at the UN and other places. But this will be a very long-term process if it can be accomplished at all. And we have to keep our eye very watchful on the possible return of Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups.
Okay, thank you very much. I think now we'll go to our third series of presentations, and that will be followed, excuse me, by a Q&A session as well. So let's start with the third group of videos, please.
The job of American diplomats like me is first, last, always to protect the interests of the United States and the American people. Diplomats like me dedicate our lives to building relationships and working with partners around the world so that our people at home are safe, our country remains strong and secure, and our economy continues to grow. In countries like Albania, where I am now, we do that by focusing on democracy, defense, and business. We want Albania to strengthen the rule of law, increase its capabilities as a NATO ally, and create conditions for greater US investment. Why? Because we want Albania to be stable, secure, and prosperous, a strong partner to us. Our focus on democracy in Albania is centered on justice reform and rooting out corruption and organized crime as part of that effort. We've seen around the world that a healthy, transparent legal system will open doors for economic opportunities, including US investment. Defense is another key pillar, since it's in the interest of the United States to have strong, reliable allies that are capable of carrying their own weight. When the United States and its allies are strong, capable, and united, it positions us to win any military confrontation. That advantage, in turn, means that others think twice before they attack the United States or its allies, and in that way, it contributes to peace. Finally, on business, we're working hard with the government and business leaders in Albania to lay the foundations for investment by strengthening the rule of law. When rules are unclear and courts are corrupt, investors are scared off, and that reduces opportunities for generating jobs and prosperity, not only in Albania, but in the United States. We want to help create an environment where businesses see both opportunities and security in Albania. We want to open doors for American businesses in the market here. Those efforts will result in jobs for Americans and Albanians. In countries like Albania, we also provide foreign assistance. And as ambassador, I've emphasized to our team here how crucial it is for us to ensure that hard-earned taxpayer dollars are spent wisely. I think every American diplomat should be able to tell a fellow taxpayer, because we pay taxes too, how much we spend, why, and what we get for those hard-earned tax dollars. So we're out here working for you.
Hello, my name is Andrew Lentz, and I have been a U.S. diplomat since 2003. I often stumble when family members and friends unfamiliar with the U.S. Foreign Service ask me what I do. It's hard to summarize in brief the work of diplomacy, which doesn't always produce clear outcomes or immediate results. So, over multiple fumbling attempts, I've started saying that as a diplomat, I share with foreign audiences America's experience with democracy and our struggles and successes toward becoming a more perfect union. I interpret and explain U.S. foreign policy and the push-pull process that creates it to help develop trust and avoid misunderstanding with our foreign partners that can lead to bad outcomes. Through my reporting and analysis, I help U.S. policymakers back home understand what is happening in the country in which I am residing and how it affects our security, health, and prosperity. I am a face of America abroad, representing, with my diplomatic colleagues, the diversity and complexity of our country while advocating for and defending our interests, including our values. I joined the Foreign Service, like many diplomats in my cohort, in the shadow of the 9/11/2001 terrorist attacks. I wanted to do my part to make sure that an attack like that never happened again. My first posting was Damascus, Syria. I spent my first year there on the embassy's visa line, preventing those who would do us harm from entering the United States while facilitating legitimate travel to increase trade, reunite families, grow the U.S. economy, and build the people-to-people connections that are essential for collective security. In my second year in Damascus, in the embassy's economic section, I helped develop sanctions to hold members of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's government and family accountable for the corruption and criminal behavior that fueled resentment among the region's young population and contributed to al-Qaeda's rise. Since that first tour in Damascus almost 20 years ago, I have spent most of my State Department career in the Middle East, helping American workers back home by promoting fair labor standards in Muscat, Oman, keeping Americans in Cairo, Egypt safe during the upheaval of the Arab Spring and its aftermath, and helping to build a more stable Iraq. My work as a diplomat far from home is largely invisible to most Americans. I can't claim that I have had a direct impact on Americans' day-to-day lives, but I hope that my contributions, now 20 years after 9/11, have helped make us as Americans better understood, better connected to the world around us, and in the end, a little safer.
I think that this COVID-19 pandemic has made it clear that there are no longer really any local problems. Just thinking about the experience I had working in Mozambique on the HIV and AIDS challenges there, we were fighting stigma and trying to get through to people about the need for getting over the stigma and taking advantage of all possibilities to get treatment and all the life-saving treatment that they could get. It was one more global disease before the pandemic even hit, that when we get HIV and AIDS under control, it becomes less of a threat for Americans. In the same vein, certainly the COVID pandemic has shown us that all the work and investment that we can make in both improving the health care and public health for people in far-flung countries around the world actually, in its turn, helps to make Americans safer, healthier, and more secure.
Hello, my name is Dara Paradiso, and I'm the U.S. Consul General in Strasbourg, France. My team and I represent the United States in Eastern France and at the Council of Europe, which is a regional organization that creates legal standards for human rights, democracy, and rule of law. Every day, our work serves the American people, and I wanted to give you a few examples of how. First of all, we provide consular services to the Americans who are resident here in Eastern France and to tourists, students, and other visitors. We help people who end up in emergency situations, we replace lost passports, and more. Second, we work to support the American economy. We promote American exports here, and we encourage French companies to invest in the United States. This creates jobs for American citizens. And it also promotes trade that benefits American business and American consumers. There are actually about 500 American companies in this part of France, including some big names like Mars Wrigley. They have the second largest M&M's factory in the whole world in our region, about 12 kilometers north of where I'm sitting. Eli Lilly and Thermo Fisher. In the last few years, we've seen French companies invest in the United States and create new jobs in areas ranging from medtech to the manufacture of wood flooring. Our work at the Council of Europe also benefits American citizens, even if it's a little bit more indirect. For example, the United States and the Council of Europe worked together to create the Budapest Convention against Cybercrime. This is the international treaty that makes it possible for U.S. law enforcement to work with international partners to catch online scammers and bring them to justice. Every day in our outreach in France, we work to show the best that the United States has to offer, and we continue to build a strong friendship based on our two countries' shared values and history.
I'm Jeff Pyatt, U.S. Ambassador to Greece, and I'm delighted to talk about how the work we do here in Greece benefits the American people. At a time of tremendous dynamism in our international system and challenges to American leadership, the United States and Greece are collaborating on a wide range of issues that deliver for the American people. Number one, of course, is stopping COVID-19 and strengthening global health security. American technology and healthcare companies have helped to augment Greece's pandemic response, and the Hellenic National Public Health Organization now shares information with our CDC. And it's a source of pride here in Greece that the CEO of Pfizer, Albert Bourla, is a Greek American and one of the many Greek immigrants to the United States who have contributed to the richness of our society. Second, Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis' ambitious climate agenda and his plan to target much of Greece's 32 billion euro EU recovery fund towards investment in green energy supports American priorities. American investment in Greece's green energy sector is growing, bringing world-leading American technology and innovation to Greek customers. Greece's digital transformation is also creating opportunities for U.S. businesses, as top tech companies are expanding their footprint in Greece, taking advantage of a Balkan market of 30 million people. Third, the United States defense and security relationship with Greece is now one of the strongest in Europe. Alexandroupoli, a strategically located seaport in northern Greece, has become an important transportation and logistics hub for the U.S. Army in Europe and NATO. Meanwhile, Suda Bay in Crete provides a critical platform to project American military power in the Middle East, North Africa, and the Eastern Mediterranean. At the embassy, we also support the thriving people-to-people ties between our countries and look out for the safety and welfare of thousands of Americans who come here every year as tourists. In all these ways and many more, American diplomacy in Greece is helping to advance our shared goals for peace and prosperity in this region and beyond. And this year, as we join in the commemoration of Greece's bicentennial, we have an opportunity to celebrate the perhaps most important tie of all, our shared democratic values. In 1776, America's founders took inspiration from Athenian democracy, and 45 years later, as Greeks fought for their own independence, American Philippines rallied to their cause, offering their support to what became the first liberal revolution in Europe, inspired by the American War of Independence. And this year, as our countries celebrate 200 years of friendship, we do so knowing that President Biden and his administration are committed to building the closest relationship we have ever enjoyed.
Thank you. Let me close out with a broad general question. Nation building has not turned out to be a very successful enterprise for American diplomacy, even though we have tried and tried hard. There are around the world, if we think in terms of American leadership, a number of crises at any one time that could probably call on American power to help solve. Beirut, Lebanon is in crisis. Should we really intervene there to try to change the circumstances or not? Myanmar still is under a savage, brutal dictatorship crushing democracy. Venezuela is hanging on to its archaic values of controlling the economy and controlling the country and controlling its people's values and future. And then we have Korea. So on any given day, American power could be put to use in a half a dozen places around the world. How do we manage a role of American leadership and deal with problems where no immediate solution is apparent or likely? And how do we look forward to the things that have to be called what we say are anticipatory diplomacy, the next pandemic, food security, water security in a growing world population, and as I discovered quite recently, the thousands of satellites that are now circulating over our heads with a vast amount of space debris and completely ungoverned by any norms of behavior or government. So how do we combine this and still preserve what we think is the American role in the world today? So floor is open to anyone who wants to raise their hand and start this, and we'll close out our program with your answers and responses. And Professor Thompson Jones.
Well, I think the Biden administration's impulse to use multilateralism is a step in the right direction. The conceit that one country could solve all of the enormous problems that you listed, Ambassador, and many others we could all add, we've moved ahead. We've moved beyond those times. We don't have the resources, certainly not the military and not the economic resources to solve all the world's problems. So multilateralism is very important. Another facet that we haven't talked about much is listening and mutual understanding. It was implicit in many of the vignettes from many of our colleagues who spoke recently, but I think the need to listen more than ever is important, and making sure that not only do we project American values, American achievements overseas, but also we become much better at understanding what else is going on and bringing that back so that fellow Americans, of whom I must say only about a third have passports and have had the experiences we've all had living and working overseas, get a taste of what the rest of the world is thinking, feeling, and talking about.
Thank you. Anyone else want to take on this issue? Ambassador Campbell.
So I very much like your phrase, the anticipatory problem, since you provided a chilling list of today's challenges. And one of the biggest challenges for any administration is to find the bandwidth, both to address today's gripping problems, and they're very real and they're very hard, and many of them can't be solved quickly. And so we advance things incrementally. And as Professor Thompson Jones said, smartly, we try to advance them by working with others who have interests aligned with ours, moving in the same direction. But I wanted, on the anticipatory challenges and sort of throwing out new ideas, I wanted to emphasize that when we talk about diplomacy, it's not only state to state diplomacy. And I think that's one of the biggest and most important changes we've seen over the last 25, 30 years is the engagement with new and different audiences. And whether that's engaging in positive ways with commercial organizations, student groups, finding communities of shared interests and working with those. And so multilateral diplomacy, which generally means multi-sided, state to state, is expanding in important ways to bring in new actors. And especially when we think about these challenges, whether it's marine plastic debris, whether it's the debris in the debris in space, we're going to have to break down some of those walls and think outside the box. And I love the fact that the State Department's moving forward to look at those challenges proactively.
Thank you. Ambassador Gutierrez, and then Ambassador Ray.
Yeah, I agree that multilateral diplomacy is very important. I think diplomacy is very important, and we have taken a beating in the diplomatic service the last few years. I think we need a stronger foreign service. We need to be in more places, more active and more engaged. And that should always be, to me, the first line of engagement. And we should learn from our experiences in Afghanistan and Iraq, where I think some of us thought that it'd be much easier than it really is. I don't think nation building should be an objective in and of itself. On the other hand, we cannot be blind to some problems of the world. And after all, we're the nation who, had it not been for us, the world might be different after World War II and other places. But it's always good to go together in a coalition with other countries, and it should be a last resort military intervention.
Thank you. Ambassador Ray?
I agree with everything that's been said, but I would also add, I think we need to do a little tinkering with our own thinking. We need to understand, for example, you don't build a nation overnight. You don't build it in 2 years. We need to change our time horizons and understand that these changes that need to take place in some countries will not happen quickly, and they might not happen in quite the way that we would do it. But and I think Professor Thompson Jones hit it well. We need to learn to listen to find out what it is that other people want for themselves and look at how that maybe we can live with that. We should not be in the business of remaking the world in our image, but we should be in the business of building relationships so that everyone in the world can live together effectively and recognize that Rome wasn't built in a day.
Thank you all very, very much. This brings us to the conclusion of our program. I want to thank UNC. I want to thank Ambassador Stevenson, Senator Van Hollen for his excellent address, the excellent team here at UNC, Ingrid Smith and Rowan Abbasi and Sugan Gupta, and our expert Melissa Holt for their work in this program. American Diplomacy's own Sandy Johnson and our American Diplomacy Journal 25th Anniversary Organizing Team, especially Renee Earl, Brenda Schoonover, June Perry, and Maggie Pearson. The board of American Diplomacy, the presenters and the panelists, and especially you, the audience. There is a notation on the Q&A about where you can go for additional information about foreign service life and being a foreign service officer. And so I advise you to find, if you have a diplomat in residence at your university or nearby, contact that person. And if you need help contacting that person, then my email is wrobertpearson@yahoo.com, and I will put you in touch with someone who can put you in touch with a diplomat in residence. There will be a recording of this program. It will be available to you, edited. And so those of you who would like to see it again or see particular parts of it will be able to do so. And we thank you for your interest. So I think you see that diplomacy is now only going to grow in importance as the world becomes more closely connected and problems become more complex. So your support of that diplomacy is a vital part of keeping America safe and keeping our lives prosperous. So we hope you enjoyed our presentation. We thank you for being with us and attending tonight. And so I wish you good night and much success. Thank you so much.